Right, hello everyone. Welcome and thanks very much for joining us today. This is an AFN Network Plus webinar. I'm Jez Fredenberg. I'm based at the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of East Anglia, where I'm the Knowledge Exchange Fellow for the network. Also with me today is my colleague Neil Ward, who's a co-lead who'll be helping out. So just so you know, the AFN Network Plus is focused on the UK agri-food system and identifying the research gaps that could help reduce emissions, as well as improve rural livelihoods, biodiversity, and food security. So today is part 2 of a webinar on the security of our fruit and vegetable production and supplies in the UK and how research and policy can address challenges, ensure security, and tackle climate change. We're focusing on fruit with our speaker, Ali Kappa, who I'll introduce in a minute. But in part 1, we focused on vegetable and salad crops with Lee Stiles from Lee Valley Growers. So I'll put a link in the chat in a second if you want to catch up with that on YouTube. So just to set the scene a little bit, 60% of the fruit eaten in the UK comes from overseas, including from many countries projected to suffer from drying as a result of climate change. Some are already suffering that at the moment, and obviously it's just going to get worse. At the same time, you'll have seen headlines over the last 12 months or so that many UK growers have scaled back production or are thinking of giving up entirely. So why are we at this point? What needs to change? And how can research and policy help? So I'm very pleased to introduce Ali, who's going to be speaking for us today. She's going to delve into all of this for us. Ali Kappa is a well-known and very knowledgeable voice in the horticulture sector. She grows apples and hops on the Herefordshire-Worcestershire border and is the executive chair of British Apples and Pears, which is a grower-funded trade group. Ali also sits on the NFU's Horticulture and Potatoes Board, which she was chair of from 2016 to 2022. She's contributed to the government's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, the Lords Horticulture Committee inquiry, and regularly appears in the national media. So if you've got any questions for Ali as we go through, please write them in the Q&A rather than chat so we can find them easily. And we should have a good 30 minutes at the end for questions. So we're going to be recording, well, we are recording this, and we'll be putting it on YouTube for others to see afterwards. So if you don't want to be identified as participating, then either don't ask a question or do so anonymously. So Ali, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jez. I am not at home today. I'm sitting in my daughter's school because I've had a meeting here this morning. And there is quite a lot of background noise at the moment, but hopefully you can't all hear it. So good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see some friends from the industry on the participants list. I thought I would start today just by giving you a bit of a insight into our business at home before talking then about the industry issues and climate change and R&D. I have got some slides which worked a moment ago, so hopefully they will work again now. I'm just going to share those and hopefully everybody can see those. Jez, could you just give me the thumbs up that you can see those? Brilliant. So Jez has asked me to sort of look at the challenges and opportunities and to look through the lens of climate change. Let's just remember that food is our medicine. Food, especially fresh fruit and vegetables, is such an important part of our diet, and I think often overlooked by government policy, which I can come on to. But I thought I'd just start with where am I in the world? If I was at home, this is where I would be, which is in a little village in the top left-hand corner there called Suckley. And we look at the Malvern Hills. We have the most beautiful farm. That is our outlook, looking at the Malvern Hills. Where exactly? Between Bromyard and Malvern, on the Hereford-Worcester Road, in the county of Herefordshire, Worcestershire. We're right on the border, about an hour south of Birmingham. And the picture in the bottom right just shows what our land area looks like. Our property is in the top of that photo, and then you can see lots of serried ranks of either hops or apples or fields that are coming into production. And this is what we look like at home. My husband and I, it's my husband Richard in the middle, a farming partnership with his father, who is still going strong. And the reason for putting this slide up is that not just in the UK, but all over the world, most farming businesses are family partnerships. And I think that's quite important to remember, that there's a family at the heart of most food production. And actually, in our case, our next generation are 21 and 17. So it won't be long probably before they're starting to appear on this slide as well. So this is what hops looks like. I always show a few pictures just to sort of bring things to life. Hops is a very unusual crop. We grow hops to flavour beer, and at harvest, which is the bottom left picture there, that's what the crop looks like. We are taking a very tall 16 to 18 foot plant into a static picking machine. So we take the crop out of the field to a barn where we pick it, and it's just the flower in the hands there in the slide that we're after. And in the base of that flower is all of the magic. It looks like pollen when you open up the flower, but it's actually the lupulin gland of the hop that has over 400 hop oils. And those hop oils are what flavour the beer. And there are all sorts of flavours, from chocolate and molasses to floral, honey, spice. There's all sorts of flavours in that hop profile that add flavour to the beer. So that's what the hop crop looks like. And these are our apple orchards. So just a few pictures here. The one in the middle is probably the most important, because without pollination in the spring and without a plentiful supply of insects, we don't have a crop. So we love not just our bees and their beehives, but our solitary bees and all of the insects that fly through our orchards to create pollination. So what are you looking at here? What's in these pictures? The bottom two pictures is the planting of a new orchard, and orchards now are often, the trees are planted about a metre apart. Once the trees start to grow, they're supported by post and wire work, and we are growing a fruit wall, or a wall of fruit. We don't really have trees dotted about orchards anymore. That's quite traditional. We're growing fruit walls because we want to present, as you can see in the top left there, a wall of fruit to pickers. But also, we want to present a very easy crop to prune, to thin, to maintain through the growing year. So it's all about productivity and efficiency. But we do plant a new orchard using GPS, and yeah, they are in straight rows because we're using technology to make sure that we achieve that. So that's what the apple orchards look like. At home, we grow Gala, Red Windsor, Junami, Sunburst, and we also grow some cider apples as well, Dabinet and Harry Masters. We grow 9 different hop varieties. So, and actually new varieties are a really important area in terms of the future of our business. I chair the National Hop Breeding Programme and do lots of work in the sector in terms of where our new apple varieties are coming from. Just in case none of you have been inside an apple pack house, this is what an apple pack house looks like. It's quite difficult to show you. There's lots of different parts of the process. The apples come in wooden bins, and they are floated through a grading system. At the back there, you can see a sort of channel before these channels of water. Apples are floated through on water underneath a big camera bank, and the camera bank grades the apples, and it grades them for weight, size, so diameter, colour, and internal and external quality. It's pretty unforgiving, if I'm honest. And what we end up with are these channels that you can see in this photo of different size and colour and class of apple. And those channels are then, that's what defines what goes to each customer. Apples are one of the few products that float through a pack house. We float them to prevent bruising. Bruising is our biggest enemy. because if we bruise apples either at picking or during the grading and packing process, we can't sell them, and we certainly can't store them. And the long-term storage of apples is very important because it enables us to pick a British crop and sell it for up to 12 months. So long-term storage is a big part of our piece. It's one of our biggest challenges because obviously we need energy for long-term storage. So moving on, most British apples are sold in a 6-pack. I can talk about plastics if people want me to. There's pros and cons. Lots of cons, but lots of pros. So the 6-pack of apple is often how you would see apple presented. This British apple pack from Tesco is quite represented across all of the different retailers and often hides in that white box that has got no print in it, that will have printed on it a date code and also a variety. And there are hundreds of different varieties that we sell. And the hundreds of different varieties often turn up in this British apple pack. So if you're wondering where your Egremont Russet or your Cox's Orange Pippin or your heritage varieties are, they're often in this British apple pack when you go shopping. So Jez asked me to talk about the challenges and opportunities. The challenges are really tough at the moment. Declining profits, driven primarily by inflation. Energy it has been a really big one. Workforce costs are just inflating at a tremendous rate at the moment. And we're suffering from returns not keeping up with those costs. We have had an issue with seasonal labour availability, cost, visa length, the complexity of a seasonal workers scheme that still isn't quite embedded by government. There are some issues around food waste, and plastics is a big part of that story, which I can talk about. Climate change is a big challenge, and I'll talk about the sorts of R&D areas that we're looking at. And then government policy, which I would say is fairly underwhelming when it comes to fruit and vegetables. So why is cost of production such a big issue? These are actually just the inflation numbers from the 2022 growing year. I could have added to this 2023. But what we saw was just extraordinary. Energy going up by 80%, fertilizer by 75%, diesel 50%, packaging 25%, labour by 15%. These numbers are just very different to the previous couple of decades, where I would describe the economic conditions of the previous 2 decades, 2000 to 2020, as fairly benign, low interest rates, low inflation rates. And one would have expected the inflation on this left-hand side for all of these numbers to have been between 2 and 4%. And when you've had 2 to 4% inflation for 20 odd years, to suddenly get this range of between 10 and 80% in 1 year with almost no warning, it was a real shocker for the whole industry. What do these inflation rates mean in terms of cost per pack? In 2022, they meant that the cost, and this is the cost of production, this is not the retail price, they mean that the cost of production on an apple pack needed to increase by about 7 pence. That's anywhere between about 10 and 15% more than it was the year before. Again, that's an extraordinary number to try and present to a retailer. That's not what they were expecting. And you can see there are different cost per pack increases here depending on the crop. So that decline in profits, this is just a summary really. Between 2021 and 2023, the overall cost of production on apple increased by 30%, but the returns only increased by 8%. So there's a big disparity there. Why is there a disparity? It starts with this crop is in the ground. This is a perennial crop. These orchards are planted, we're committed. That puts you in quite a difficult position when you're trying to negotiate very high cost of production increases with a retailer, because you can't just say, right, we're going to stop doing this year, we're going to take it out and we'll do something else instead because you don't want to pay. can't just take an orchard out overnight. So we've got, I would guess you would call that a very weak negotiating position. That's part of the problem. You've also got a real disparity in balance of power between small family farming businesses, even the largest, even those that are turning over 40 or 50 million, they're SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. And they're trying to negotiate with multi-billion-pound retailers. So you've got a balance of power issue. But what it means for a grower is you either build debt because you're not making a profit, you're making a loss, or you stop doing it. And so growers are choosing to do different things, and some are doing a combination of things. But what they are all doing is pausing their investment plans. So in 2023, in the run up to the winter of 2022-23, what we saw was that only a third of the trees that had been planned for planting actually got a third of the trees were cancelled. And where normally about 5% would be renewed, there was actually only about 2.5% planned for renewal. So investment plans have really gone on hold. And we saw the government make a policy decision around, ETII, what on earth does that mean? Sorry, there's so many acronyms. ETII is the Energy Trade Intensive Industries Scheme. So this was the government's way of supporting industry, business, with subsidised energy. But they didn't include fruit and vegetables on that list. Unbelievably, cement was on the list. Kew Gardens were on the list. I'm glad that Kew Gardens were on the list. But I don't understand why commercial fruit and veg production was not on the list for subsidised energy. So we just feel like we've had it from all sides. And as Jez has said, with my British apple and pear hat on, we've made quite a lot of noise about the impact for the sector. And here are just some of the press articles and some of the headlines. So now all of a sudden my slides won't go forward. I don't know what I've done. Why is profit so important? Rishi Sunak came to the NFU conference this week, and he sat on stage and made a very odd comment at the end. He made a very odd comment, which is, I know you're not in it for the money. And I have to say that the whole audience were all looking at each other thinking, well, if we're not in it for the money, what on earth do you think we're in it for? Because food and farming is not a charity. We are businesses. And if we can't make a profit, we cannot pay tax. We cannot pay wages that pay tax and national insurance. But most importantly, we can't reinvest. So we've got this mindset shift, which we need to find in Westminster. And that mindset shift is that these businesses do need to make a profit. They do need to make money, because otherwise the innovation stops, the investment in new technology stops. And for me, because I love new variety development, the innovation for the consumer stops, the innovation in new tastes, new flavors, new ideas. And importantly, the innovation in nutrition stops. So profit is not a dirty word. It's a really important word. And if businesses make a profit, they can reinvest in all of these things. And what does that mean? Just to give you an example of a new varietal shift that we've seen in the last 7 to 10 years. The photo on the right is of a Gala clone called Gala Schneeko. Quite a nice red clone. It's got the Gala stripe on it. But look at the clone on the left, Gala Big Bucks. It's not a typo. It was named by South African growers. And Big Bucks is a beautiful, all over red Gala apple. Why is that important? Because consumers buy with their eyes, and consumers love red, shiny apples. And they are more inclined to buy the apple on the left than the apple on the right. And again, we can get into a debate about whether that's right or not in the Q&A. Automation is a really important part of the investment that we're continually making. So what you're looking at here is what the industry is doing currently and has been doing for the last 5 to 10 years. So this is where we are at the moment, although we are moving on. So on the top right there, you've got a tractor with a bin train, a number of bins, and you've got pickers around that train picking into the bins all of the fruit that they can reach. And then the taller fruit, this is a picking platform on the left-hand side, and the bin is up on the picking platform, and the pickers are picking into the picking platform all of the fruit at height. And these pickers are protected by a cage, so they're able to pick at height and stay safe, which is really, really important. So this is what a lot of growers are doing today. But this is where a lot of growers have been investing in the last 2 or 3 years, is in these picking platforms that also have these automated arms. And look at the difference, because I'm just going to flick back. Every picker here in the field has got a picking bucket around their neck. And also here, it's quite hard to see in these little photos, but everyone is picking into a bucket in order to then empty that into the bin. But in this new system, the picker is freed from that and is just picking straight onto these automated arms, which automatically fill the bins, which are left behind in the orchard to then be collected. This system of automated arms has improved productivity by 25%. Each one of these picking platforms with automated arms is at a cost of 80 to 90,000 per unit. So you can see that profit's really important, because without profit, you can't keep reinvesting in the latest automation. And of course, this is where we're hoping we will get to, which is robotics. I have to say, we're still some way off. I've invested a lot of my own time personally in helping the Centre for Doctoral Training, which is an initiative. It's a link between the University of East Anglia, Lincoln University, and Cambridge University to bring through PhD students to solve these robotic problems. And the Centre for Doctoral Training is something I've been very proud to co-chair the advisory board of that for the last 4 or 5 years. It might even be a bit longer. But this is the future. It's just not coming fast enough. So seasonal labour, I just want to bust some myths, just in case there's any of you sitting there feeling uncomfortable about pickers picking our fruit and veg. There are lots of myths, but the truth is that all first world economies bring labour from overseas to pick their fruit and veg. No first world economies pick their own fruit and veg. It's not just the UK. But it's a win-win. It should be seen as a win-win for the shopper and the worker. We have the highest standards of worker welfare in the world. We're not perfect, and there will always be bad actors, as there are in any industry, but our standards are excellent. Our workers don't provide any pressure on local services. They live on farm. They're not taking local housing. They rarely go to the doctor, and they very rarely touch the hospital services. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates and highest vacancy rates on record. And why is it a win-win for the seasonal worker? Seasonal workers come into our country and are able to earn 6 to 10 times what they can at home. It's a win-win for the shopper, because we have some of the cheapest food in the first world economies. In fact, we're one of the cheapest places to buy food in the world. So, climate change. What does climate change look like? There's probably some better maps now. I'm in the middle of reading The Nomad Century by Gaia Vince. If you haven't read that, it's really worth reading. It's a brilliant book, looking through the lens of where agricultural production will be in the future, where food production will be, and where there will be mass migration from and to. The Nomad Century, I'd highly recommend it. But this map shows where we will be growing food in the future. and it's in the north. And the UK is in a good place to grow food in the future. So it astonishes me that we've got a government that is taking land out of food production to rewild it and plant trees, because we will be growing food despite climate change, where large tracts of the world that are currently growing our food and we're importing it will find it very difficult in the future. It's also about water recharge rates. And basically on this map, anything orange or yellow is not great, and anything blue is quite good. There are parts of the UK where our ground recharge rates could be better, but I would contend in this winter that we have had that we just need to invest properly in water infrastructure. And what do I mean? I'd like to see a HS2 for water. I'd like to see our, quite frankly, Victorian water infrastructure brought up to date. I'd like to see a 21st, if not a 22nd century water infrastructure plan for the UK, because enough water falls on our island, it just doesn't always fall in the right place. And as we've seen this winter, probably more and more water is going to fall. We just need to plan it better. We need to reserve it when it falls. We need to allow it to escape into reservoirs and out to sea. And then we need to utilise that water when we have droughts. But that takes some long-term planning, and we don't have good long-term planning at the moment. Do we have a good UK food policy? I would contend that no, we don't. And what I have heard so many times from government officials and ministers is we don't need to grow food in the UK. We can import it. We're a rich first world economy. We don't need to grow food here. We can import food from wherever we want. And I think the last couple of years has really shown how naive that statement is. We do have a brilliant food standards agency that ensures that we do consistently deliver safe food to the UK consumer. And we did have an excellent piece of work from Henry Dimbleby in the National Food Strategy. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. And the government response to that has been underwhelming. One might even go as far as saying it's been forgotten. And I would argue that the greatest growth potential is in horticulture, especially fruit and vegetables. So where are we self-sufficient? In strawberry, we're fairly self-sufficient during our growing season from May to October. In carrot, we're fairly self-sufficient. In potato, we're pretty good. But there are loads of crops. There's 340 different fruit and vegetable crops that we grow in the UK. And there's lots of them where we could grow more. Apple is a brilliant example. I would say that, wouldn't I? We're 40% self-sufficient. So 40% of all the apple that you buy in UK retail is British grown. I would contend that that could be 70 or 80%. So we've got the opportunity to double the sector. And the same is true of raspberry, blueberry, blackberry. There's lots of different fruit crops where we could grow more. Apricot, peach, fruits that we haven't been able to grow very well in the past, but we will now be able to grow with a warmer climate. And there are lots of veg crops that we could do better at. And there are lots of crops that we need to grow in order to satisfy our immigrant population. Crops from other parts of the world that we are now able to grow that we should be growing here. So the growth potential for horticulture is huge, and I would like to see government policy that sets targets, because out of that would fall the right policy. A quick plug for how healthy an apple is, just in case you didn't know, and I'm sure you all do. One apple is 77 calories. There's lots of very positive things about an apple. It is your hydration. It's the antioxidant level is very high. If you eat it with the skin on, you're getting fiber. That's very good for your gut microbiome, very good for your digestive system generally. For me, it is the snack that everybody should carry every day. We shouldn't be eating biscuits, chocolates, and crisps. We should be eating an apple instead, and it will keep you feeling full for longer because it's a low GI snack. So, research and development. This is our list really of what we are focused on. Um, Climate change is such a big subject, but climate change, we are very focused on a range of issues. So climate change is changing pollination dates. It is bringing frost at different times than it used to. We are seeing issues with vernalization. Vernalization is the chill that we get in the winter. Trees need a cold winter in order to reset for a good growing season the next year. We've had a fairly warm winter this year. And so if we get warmer winters, vernalization gets disrupted. And a warmer climate with hotter, drier spells brings a higher risk of hail, which is one of our enemies as an outdoor crop. So this climate change brings us lots of things that we need to focus on. I'll come on to net zero in a sec, because that obviously is part of this. Pest and disease is a big priority for us, and that's something that British apple and pear growers, I'm really proud of them, are all raising voluntary levy, and that work, despite our exit from AHDB, that work is continuing, as too is our crop protection R&D work. We are in the middle of a biochar project. Biochar is a form of carbon, and we embarked on this project because at the moment, at the end of orchard life, we've done this brilliant job of sequestering carbon in our orchards over a 15 or 20-year period through the grassland and through the trees. And then at the end of orchard life, growers at the moment are grub trees and burn them. So we need to fix that, because that's not very good from a net zero point of view. So the biochar project, the principle is, could we turn that woody biomass to biochar and spread that on our land to retain the carbon? The potential for apple orchards to achieve net zero is high, because we are a permanent crop. We're not turning over the soil every year. And obviously, if we could find an alternative fuel source to fossil fuel for the work that we need to do in the orchards, and if we could use non-chemical fertilizers and biologicals for our pest and disease protection, then I think we've got the potential to get there. So net zero is an area that I feel quite optimistic about. It's not true of all food crops. I think there needs to be an acceptance that food does use energy, food production does use energy, and it won't be true for all food crops, but that's a debate we can get into as well. And that, Jez, you'll be pleased to hear, is it. I hope I've left enough time for questions.
You have, thanks, Ali. That was really interesting. We've got a few questions coming in, but I kind of just wanted to start with what happens if we carry on as we are with all those pressures you've sort of outlined and the kind of government attitude of cheap food and we're just going to keep importing it. If nothing changes, where does that take us? Do we end up with does the kind of the hungry become more hungry? You know, what sort of happens really?
So I think there's two things here, and neither of them am I scared of talking about. The first is, if you produce food in a first world economy on expensive land with expensive labour and with very high food standards, they cost money as well. You are going to produce a product which is more expensive than the same apple, the same gala apple that might come from, for example, South Africa or Chile, where the land prices are lower, the labour costs are lower, and the standards are lower. So what does that mean for a UK grower? Does it mean that they have to compete with that? I would contend no. I actually think the cost of production should be reflected. And actually, as a retailer, they've got the chance to amortize out a higher cost in one jurisdiction and a lower cost in another through a basket of margin across the different countries that they buy from. So I think there's a reality first that I need to face into. We are an expensive place to grow food. However, if we don't change some of this, we're just going to be importing more and more and more cheaper food, with lower worker welfare standards, lower environmental standards, and pressure on, from a climate change point of view, on water that isn't there, on environments that we're exporting environmental damage. And I think we will become food insecure. We've already seen it with salad crops. You've spoken to Lee. We've had empty shelves on salad crops. I don't want to see the same on fruit. So there's a direction. We need to change this. It was great to see the Labour Party commit at the NFU conference this week that they would make a commitment to British grown. We need, this isn't about being protectionist, and neither is it about being anti-free market. It's just being about realistic in terms of food security. We do need a safe source of food. And when you go back to those climate change maps that I showed, we won't be able to import the food in the same way that we have been. So we need to start getting fit for the future. We need to start putting plans in place that mean we can not only grow more for our own population, but actually I think we've got a moral responsibility to grow more fruit and vegetable in the UK so that we can export it to countries that aren't going to be able to produce it in the same way as they are today. So I would contend we need to accept we're not the cheapest place to grow it, but we are the highest quality. I mean, the apples that we produce in the UK are some of the highest quality in the world. I was in America last week, and I was with somebody who was British, and they were moaning about how the apple quality just isn't the same in the States. They're not bad, but they're just not as good as the UK. So we need to put in a long-term plan to grow our sector and to grow much more here. And that's not at the expense of the environment. I'd like to see an environmental land management policy that does good environmental work within a growing crop, not instead of, which is how it's designed at the moment. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's a good answer. I like it. Thank you. I'm going to come on to a question from Amy Stoner in a minute, but I just wanted to just quickly follow up. In terms of retailers, and like you just outlined, there is a potential here to sort of become food insecure if we're just relying on imports all the time. What seems to be the attitude of retailers? I mean, they surely must be looking at the sort of the long-term security of their own supply chains. Like why are they not why do you think they're not sort of investing more in sort of homegrown produce and those relationships?
So business is cyclical, it goes in cycles. And I'm old enough to have seen a few of the cycles. And I think we're coming towards the end of a cycle. So we definitely, if I go back 10, but definitely 20 years ago, retailers used to get really excited about new in-season British. There'd be in-store theatre, there'd be point of sale, there'd be photos, there'd be promotions and offers, and there'd be lots of excitement, drawing the consumer's attention to new season strawberry, new season apple. I could blame the rise of the discounters, I could blame government policy, I could blame the cost of living crisis, I could blame the 2008 recession. There's lots of different things that have changed that in the last 10 years. But in the last 10 years, what we have seen is a race to the bottom on price. Retailers have stopped long-term planning. They've literally, it's been about price. Now, they're not all the same. Not all retailers are the same. There are some good actors and there are some poorer actors within the supply chain. But we see an awful lot of Aldi price from a number of the retailers. Now we're seeing Aldi and Lidl price matching going on from one of the retailers. So I would contend there's probably too much retail square footage in the UK. And that is what leads to this ultra competition. Do I think it's starting to change? I think I can see the winds of change. I'm certainly starting to have conversations and receive emails from retailers about the need for long-term planning, the need for long-term relationships. So I think we're at the turn of a cycle. And I think as growers, we need to face into retail and say, we can't be the cheapest. Of course we can't. Don't ask us to be the cheapest. We're on the most expensive land. We've got some of the most expensive labour cost. We have the best growing standards in the world. Don't ask us to be the cheapest. But if you want the best quality, we can deliver that. And if you want it with some of the lowest carbon and water footprint, we can also deliver that. So I think we've just got to have more honest conversations. But I do think I can see a step change coming. I just hope it comes in time.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does the sort of squeezing of of the farm gate price and suppliers, how does that impact your ability to invest in net zero measures and from a supermarket's perspective, scope 3 sort of measures and targets?
So there's a huge amount of pressure coming down on fruit and vegetable growers to supply their scope 3, their data, our data, in order for the retailer to report their scope 3. This is in a really difficult box, and it's a very long conversation. I'll try and keep it very short. The data's not very good. It's not very good because not enough life cycle carbon analysis has been done on British grown crops. Apple are doing theirs. And I understand one or two other crops are starting to look at doing it as well. If you have your life cycle carbon analysis data, you can then populate carbon calculator tools with that data, and you then make them more meaningful. At the moment, if I do a carbon, and this isn't, the carbon calculator tools are not bad, some of them are quite good, but none of them have got really good British-based perennial crop data in them. And without that, it means that the data is partway there. Some of it's a bit meaningless. So we need good LCA data. We need carbon calculator tools that utilize that. And then we can start to provide meaningful data to retail. At the moment, they're all asking for something different. And the sector is being driven sideways by having to resource up, so recruit and employ people to respond to all the different requests that they're getting from retail, adding more costs that nobody wants to pay for. It's not fair. We can't reduce emissions without making a profit. There's a great saying, it's very hard to go green if you're in the red. Growers want to, I mean, again, there's always exceptions, but all the growers I talk to, and the board of British Apples and Pears has all of the biggest and the best and some of the smallest too represented. And we represent the smallest through the producer organisations that bring them all together. And all the growers that I speak to, they want to have the best environmental action going on in their orchards. We don't have a crop unless we have pollinators. We all know that. So we want wildflowers in our orchards. We want to be doing as all the right measures by our pollinators. And we will also want crop protection products that deal with the predators without upsetting our pollinators. So we want targeted, precise, it's called integrated pest management. We want precise action. And we want to be using biologicals. That's complicated as well because the regulation from the Chemicals Regulatory Directive is making that very expensive and very time consuming when it shouldn't be. So one of the other jobs I do, Jez, is to chair Horticulture Crop Protection Limited, which is that piece of work that's come out of AHDB that allows us to get extensions and emergency authorizations. And that is, we're in a difficult place at the moment because having come out of Europe, we're now an expensive place to get a biological registered. Because why would you come to the UK and spend the same money as you have to spend in the EU, but you've got a much bigger market in the EU? So we need government to fix that as well. There's loads of questions in the chat. Do you want to go to some of them?
That's what I'm going to, yeah. So from Rosemary Collier, so just picking up on the issue about pollinators, she said, yeah, great talk, Ali. You mentioned the need for insects as pollinators, You also mentioned concern about government plans to rewild. I think there's agreement that we need to provide more habitats for insects and other wildlife. How do you see it increasing biodiversity without impacting food production? And I kind of just wanted to maybe just tie this in as well with there's another question here from somebody who's anonymous, saying, does the reduced level of pollinators impact apple production?
So today, I think it would be fair to say that the concern we've got about pollination dates shifting and therefore not having the right insects at the right time, we're watching that, but we're not seeing it yet. So it's not a today problem, but it's a future problem we're trying to mitigate. So hopefully that answers the anonymous question. In terms of Rosemary, great to see you. In terms of Rosemary's point, what I get very upset about with the elm scheme is so much of it is designed to take land out of production and rewild it. So what's happening in veg at the moment? Vegetables are often grown on rotation. You can't grow the same vegetable year after year on the same land because you drive down your yield and it's not good for the soil. But what's happening in Worcestershire and Kent and Yorkshire is on really good veg growing land is that landlords are taking that land back from the tenancy agreements with veg growers and they're going to put it down to wild bird seed for £853 a hectare. Well, that is not good for the sector. So what I would like to see, and so this is not about let's just grow food everywhere, but what I would like to see is environmental land management measures like I think we finally got just this month, where we're being encouraged to put wildflowers into the orchards. So it's not about we really need environmental measures that allow food production with environment beside. Just to deal with the rewilding point, rewilding definitely has a place, but on grade 3 and grade 4 land, not on grade 1 and grade 2 land. So rewilding a large tract, I understand the science behind that. I understand the value of doing that for nature and biodiversity. But we must be very careful that we choose our worst land to do that on, not our best land. And the way the elm scheme is designed at the moment is it's encouraging the wrong action because we're seeing grade 1 and grade 2 land come out of production. So that needs to change. Hopefully, Rosemary, that answers the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on, there's a few comments about agroforestry, and I suppose this ties into sort of net zero and the potential of the sector. What I guess, obviously, you've got your kind of more commercial grower sort of hat on, but what's the potential of agroforestry in other systems, and would that sort of work in terms of scaling up the sort of food production in different places? Like how does that sort of work? Is there a potential there for sequestering more carbon, and how we would use fruit trees?
If people are prepared to pay more for their food, yes. And I say that carefully because I don't think people are prepared to pay more for their food in the UK. The problem with, if I just think back in time, on our farm, we used to have strawberries growing in the ground in between our tree rows. We don't really grow strawberries in the ground anymore in this country because they're inefficient and an expensive way to produce strawberries. We now grow strawberries in a tabletop where we're presenting that at shoulder level to the picker. It's faster pick, it's more efficient, it means you're not bending over in a field. And of course, it's in a polytunnel, so it's protected. So agroforestry makes production far less efficient. When you're growing 2 or 3 crops side by side, or even, I've seen some lovely work being done. Ben Taylor Davis has done some lovely work down near Ross, Regen Ben, where he's planted an apple orchard. It's got, I don't know, 25 or 30 varieties in it. And as a commercial apple grower, I sort of approached it going, oh my God, how do you manage the picking? Because we don't grow multiple varieties in one orchard for a reason. It's inefficient because you have to keep going back in and out because they all ripen at a different date. And they also pick differently and they handle differently. So there is a role for agroecology. but we need to find efficient and cost-effective ways of doing it.
There's a question. Yeah, thank you for that. Question here. I wanted to go back to Amy. Sorry, Amy. I've been meaning to ask your questions at the beginning. Amy Stoner. She's talking about how do we get that kind of shift in mindset of those in Westminster, i.e. government, to support UK fruit and vegetable growers. And I sort of wanted to tie this into a question around research, because I think when we talk about research, we often talk about science, technology, that kind of thing. Do you think there is a role for research that looks more at changing minds in government and shifting that sort of mentality?
Yes. Okay. So, Amy, I don't think it's about protests and putting tractors on the street. I don't think that will shift minds in Westminster. I really hope we don't get to that stage. I do think it's about advocacy. And I do think I've spent a lot of time with Tim Farron, who leads the shadow work for DEFRA in the Liberal Democrat Party, and I've spent time with Daniel Zeitner, who is the equivalent for Labour. It is about advocacy, it's about education, it's about helping our Westminster politicians understand. The trouble is, when they come into power, they get these, especially the Conservative Party of late, they get these ideological ideas. And so we've had ideologies. We've heard Jacob Rees-Mogg talk about, we don't need fruit pickers. We can buy fruit wherever we want in the world. We don't need to pick it here. We don't need to grow it here. And the same around immigration. Let me just say, seasonal workers, they're not in the immigration statistics because they're not immigrants. They come in and they go home again. So they're seasonal workers. So I think it's really important that our Westminster politicians spend more time properly understanding the sector, getting their feet dirty on the ground, and really lifting the lid to understand what the issues are. One of the problems with politics is they like it simple and they like to keep it to sound bites. And that is very difficult for us because our sector's complicated. So how do we shift the mindset? Let's hope a change of government helps. I think it might. But it's advocacy, it's education, it's engagement. And that does come at a cost. I can't tell you how many times I have rebriefed the new DEFRA team. I don't mind doing it. But they do keep changing the deck chairs and it is very frustrating. So, Amy, that's the answer to that question. And on the R&D, sorry, just remind me, Jez, on the R&D.
Well, I was sort of saying, is there a role for research
yes.
that looks at more social research that looks at changing minds rather than like science and technology?
There is definitely a role for research. There's a role for an evidence base. What government needs is an evidence base. And if the evidence base supports the proposed policy, it is a much easier sell-in. So could I have an evidence base, please, for those of you who are the scientists on this call? I want an evidence base for the reasons why we should grow food in the UK. That needs to be about standards. It needs to be about low carbon footprint, low water footprint. So I need an evidence base to support what might be more expensive food, but the rationale for why. And when it comes to fruit and veg, all of the health reasons why. And let's not forget the nutrition. The closer to source that you buy your fruit and vegetables, the fresher they are, the more nutritious they are. So whilst there's nothing wrong with an apple that's come from South Africa or New Zealand, well, there's probably not quite grown to the same standard as ours. It will never be as nutritious as an apple grown in the UK. And our apples ripen more slowly. So they, in my opinion, have a better taste and flavour. So yeah, there is definitely a role for any evidence that can help support the advocacy around policy.
Very quickly, because we're about to run out of time, but is there anything else when you've got a bunch of researchers, scientists on here? Is there anything else that the sector really needs in terms of research?
What I'd really like to see, and I'm saying this as politely as possible, I'd like to see more engagement with the sector about what we need, rather than an academic thinking about what they need in order to maintain their overhead, recruit their new PhDs, coming to us with ideas that are often quite good, but not quite there. And what I would like to see is much more applied research and the money for it. So when we have projects which involve academic innovation and grower trials, I don't want to see the split of money as 50-50. Grower trials cost lots of money and there's a lot of risk. Growers are taking lots of risk. So if as an academic you're thinking about applying some research and doing some grower trials, the split of spend, in my opinion, should be 10 to 20% academic, 80 to 90% grower trials. That's what applied research looks like. And I'd like to see a lot more of that. So it's about more engagement and about better understanding of what we think the issues are so that we're co-designing. I don't like that word because it's a government word, but we're co-designing research rather than it being a sort of one-sided. And all the help we can have, please, with Innovate UK applications and management, because it's so bloody complicated, would be fantastic.
Brilliant.
Please. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear. I do apologise.
Oh, don't worry. That's absolutely fine. No, thank you so much for all your insights, answering all those questions. Thank you everyone for participating. So our next webinar is going to be looking at peatlands, which is a really important area for vegetable growing and also a big carbon emitter. We're going to be looking at how we should manage that, and that will be on March the 7th. Ali, if you want to come, that would be great. Professor Heiko Baltzar, who's the Director of Institute for Environmental Futures, will be presenting on that. He's done lots of work on the fens with growers there. So we'll share that link in the next few days. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Ali, thank you so much. We're going to make this video available on YouTube if you want to catch up on everything. And I'm going to pull together a written briefing based on this and Lee's webinar a couple of weeks ago on horticulture as well. So you can also browse our back catalogue on YouTube if you missed anything. So the links are in the chat. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming. And Ali, thank you very much. We'll see you again another time.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.